I had an opportunity to take the tour of the Goodyear Blimp hangar in Suffield Township in northeast Ohio. So this is one of 3 hangars that Goodyear has for their blimp operations. It sits on the shores of Wingfoot Lake, and on the northeast side of this lake used to be the employee-only company park, which has since been turned into a state park. So the operations here have existed for a little over 100 years now. They have a historical marker that greets you when you first drive into their parking lot. And the sign says, in March 1917, a month before U.S. entry into World War I, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company began construction of the hangar on land the firm purchased here in 1916. During World Wars I and II, the hangar was used for building and testing lighter-than-air craft for military uses, including intelligence gathering and anti-submarine warfare. The first class of Navy airship pilots also trained at Wingfoot Lake. In 1925, the company expanded into commercial aircraft with the production of the Pilgrim, the first of the iconic Goodyear blimps. In 1960, after 43 years of building military airships, Goodyear delivered its last blimp to the Navy. Known as the Kitty Hawk of lighter-than-air, Wingfoot Lake, the oldest airship base in the country, remains active in the building and operation of Goodyear's 21st century fleet of airships. Goodyear blimps have provided aerial TV coverage of sports and entertainment events from coast to coast since the Rose Bowl parade in 1955. So a common question will be, how do I get a tour of this facility? And the short answer is you need to know someone. I know that can be a bit disappointing, but the good news is in the near future, there'll be an opportunity for the general public to get some access to this. I'll talk about that later in this video. So thanks to a few decades in aviation, I've come to know a number of blimp pilots at Goodyear. So this particular day, my friend Mike was able to take some time and give my family a tour. So the tour starts in a long hallway with a collection of photos that document each decade over the last now 100 years of operations at the facility. So as the historical sign outside said, that the first commercial blimp was the Pilgrim, so they have a couple of photos of that. And while the blimp doesn't exist anymore, the gondola does, and it currently sits in the Udvar-Hazy Museum at the Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. And next to the pictures, they had a certificate from the Guinness Book of World Records showing that they have the longest continuous use for a blimp, and they achieved that in 2014. I can't remember the exact number of years, but I want to say it was just slightly less than 20 years, and that was achieved again in 2014. So it took, basically 100 years of blimp operations to finally have one last that long, which I thought was kind of interesting. So after the Hall of Photos, we went to an area called the High Bay. And this was built during World War II to facilitate the construction of the blimps for the U.S. Navy, I believe. So right now, among the many things that it houses are some larger artifacts. So here they have the skeleton of a unfinished gondola for the previous style of blimps, as well as a gondola from one of the blimps when they decommissioned them. So I actually didn't get a good picture or video of the high bay. So from a previous tour that I took a number of years ago, you can see that it's just that. It's a very, very high room, and all of this sits inside of the much larger hangar. So also on the wall, they have one of the mounting points from one of the old blimps, the kind of the nose cone, and it's a nice photo opportunity. So one thing that's not blimp related, but is also inside of the high bay, is this old Packard truck that they had restored to represent what one would have looked like in the early, I think, 1920s. That was used by Goodyear. I don't think that this particular Packard, and I could be wrong, was actually originally owned and operated by Goodyear, but that it's one that they restored to look like one. I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of the memory that I have. So this is something that they break out for parades and some events that they have done at the hangar in the past, so it's kind of neat. So after that, we exited the high bay and then walked into the main hangar. And when we entered, we were confronted with 2 of the new Zeppelin-built blimps. They had 2 of them stacked in here. So the hangar can barely accommodate 2 of these blimps at the same time. The predecessor, the earlier style of blimps that Goodyear built, are significantly smaller. So here's an old photo I took at a previous tour, and you can see how much smaller that it is, and they could easily fit 2, I don't know, maybe even 3 of these inside of this hangar. So on the side towards the door, the blimp there was still attached to the mast truck, and it was as far forward as it could go. And then the blimp in the back was backed up as far as it can go, and the tail end of these new style have a engine in the back, so they can actually tilt the propeller down. I guess that bought them a little bit more space. So the blimp in the back actually doesn't have any helium in it during our visit. It was undergoing some heavy maintenance, so part of that they remove all the helium to clean it up before they put it back in. And this style of blimp is actually, it's a semi-rigid blimp, so it has a structure on the inside. So even when the helium is gone, it still retains the shape, whereas the older blimps, I think for the most part, would completely deflate like a balloon if you pulled all the helium out. So because it doesn't have anything to make it light, it's actually hanging from the ceiling here. So I didn't get a good close-up picture, but if I zoom in, you can see that there are straps along the spine, I guess, at the top of the blimp, and each of those are attached to the ceiling. So it's kind of odd. It looks like it's floating, but in fact, it's actually hanging from the ceiling, and that was kind of a neat experience to see. So part of the heavy maintenance, they had removed the light panels on the side, so these LEDs. It's kind of this large framework, and it was hanging separately, and then you can kind of see the mounting points along the side of the blimp where it would stay when it was attached. So one of the many challenges with a blimp like this, and especially now that this new style has the engines mounted to the side of the envelope, is how do you service those engines? Something as routine as changing the oil or adding oil could be quite laborious. So one thing that they did, I think relatively recently, if I remember correctly, is that they actually added a oil line from the underside of the blimp up to the engine at top. So in order to add oil, now they don't have to get a gantry or some sort of ladder to get up to the engine. They can actually add it at the bottom and pump it up into the engine. So I thought that was actually kind of neat. So after looking at the outside of the blimp, we went inside the gondola, and our tour guide Mike was nice enough to turn on the avionics so we could see all of those as well as any extra lights. So this modern cockpit for this now modern blimp looks very similar to really any airliner or business jet you may look into. It's got all glass. It has the similar type of moving map, and all of those other things that are quite familiar to anybody that's looked up front. Really has all the bells and whistles, which is actually pretty interesting for something that flies so slow and low. It's very well equipped in the avionics department. So one thing I found interesting about the gondola is that it actually has a bathroom in it. So previous blimps didn't. I think maybe an earlier model, one of them did, but more commonly there's no bathroom on board. So this one has a nice little bathroom, and it has its own window, so you have a private viewing port to the outside while you're in there, so I thought that was kind of neat. So one thing that I had learned that they had was a flight training device. So anybody that's gone through any training for a larger category aircraft, business jets or airliners, anything like that, you know, this one of the stages of your training involves a flight training device, and there's different levels of that, but a very basic one is a flat panel. Basically, it's a picture of the cockpit put on a flat panel, and it's kind of created at a 1-to-1 scale to help the pilot get a sense of space in where the switches are located. Even if there isn't a switch to move, you know that it's in that part of the cockpit. So they created one of those for the blimp, so I had to see it. I've been through enough training that I found it absolutely fascinating that they had one of these. So Mike was nice enough to take us into the little room where it exists and was able to sit down and kind of look it over. So as you can see, it's basically just a very simple representation of the cockpit. There are some levers. They don't do anything, but again, it's to help a pilot get familiar with location and some basic movements. So here that they can sit down and go through routine procedures like, takeoff and landing, and as well as address or practice going through abnormalities. So whether there's an electrical problem or something as big as an engine failure, you can practice going through your call-outs and all the other little intricacies of those types of events. So they've created this whole thing very well done, and it's really neat to see that. So as part of this little training device, they also had their normal checklist. So just like any airplane, it has a before start and after start checklist, as they call it, a before off mast or takeoff. And it's just the steps that a pilot will review to make sure that they completed those after that phase of flight is over. So that's kind of neat. And they've also created a quick reference handbook, or a QRH. So this is a document that in it has all of the procedures a pilot should follow for any abnormality they should encounter. So everything from an engine fire, or if the computer system should generate a message and say that a generator is offline, they can look up that message in here, and it's going to give them a step-by-step guide to troubleshoot that and either try to return that system to operation or make sure that that system doesn't impact other parts of the aircraft. So, how to turn it off. So they have this whole document for that. So that's a fascinating level of detail for their operation. So that concludes the tour that we had at the facility. It was about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, which I thought was fascinating. The wife and my kids kind of faded a little bit after a while. There's a lot of pilot talk, and it's maybe a little bit more than they cared for, but I loved every minute of it. It was a fascinating opportunity. I'm forever thankful for having the chance to walk through there and see everything that they had. So one thing that's going to be changing in the near future, so this video is in 2022, so 2023, possibly 2024, they're going to create a space, a little museum for the general public, kind of allowing self-guided tours of a lot of these artifacts that they have. They're going to create it inside of that high bay. They're going to kind of take a portion of that and use that as this museum space. So if you should find yourself in the area, you can, at that point, you'll be able to, go to the main door and they'll let you in to go tour this. In the meantime, it's still kind of closed to the general public, but I'm sure they'll make some sort of advertisement on their website to share that is available. So that's something to keep your eyes peeled for if you're in the Akron, Ohio area. And then one last thing is just north of their facility on the road, they actually have a little pull-off so that if they are doing operations that day, bringing a blimp out, launching it, all of that stuff, it's actually available to park in and kind of watch all of their operations. The day we were there, it was closed, probably because they weren't going to do any flying. But it looks like any other day that would be available. And one last opportunity is you can go to the state park and grab a lunch, have a picnic, and if they're flying, it's a short view across the lake, and you can watch all of the operations. In fact, you can even rent a pontoon boat or anything like that there and just, basically float around the lake while they're flying overhead. So there's a lot of opportunities to see the blimps when they're in operation. So that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.